So I'm going to look at the annual returns for aldehyde starting in 1977. HCDO 301177. We can see their reference to cryoprecipitate, 643 packs. And then in relation to NHS concentrate and commercial concentrates, it said all supplied by Dr. F.E. Bolton, Liverpool Royal Infirmary. And then if we look to the comment, not entirely clear what it says, but it's something cryoprecipitate provided directly by...
So only cryoprecipitate?
Only, yes, by, and then I'm not entirely sure what the last two letters are supposed to say, but maybe a reflection to the transfusion centre, a reference to the transfusion centre. All other preparations supplied via Liverpool Royal Infirmary. So for that year, we don't have information directly from aldehyde about the volume and type of products used. If we go, however, to the next year, we can see the returns in a more standard form. So HCDO 301274. We can see 10 patients treated during the year. In terms of cryoprecipitate, 48,900 and I'm not sure whether that's 20 or 30 units, but anyway, somewhere under 49,000 units of cryoprecipitate. And then it looks like just over 46,000 units of NHS factor concentrate. And then there's reference to a smaller amount of the ARMA product, factor 8, being used. Though I think there's no patients with von Willebrands appear to have been treated during that year. I don't think we have details in relation to Hemophilia B patients either. 1979 is HCDO 301343. We can see 13 haemophilic patients treated during that year, no Hemophilia B patients treated. And then we can see again the volumes of cryoprecipitate, so 27,790 cryoprecipitate, what appears to be 37,500 units of NHS factor concentrate, and then 14,000 units of the ARMA factor 8 used that year. 1980 is HCDO 301439. We see, I think, 16 patients with Haemophilia A treated, no von Willebrands. And then we only have the packs or bottles rather than the units. So it's down as 114 packs of cryoprecipitate, 136 bottles of NHS concentrate, and 268 bottles of ARMA factor 8. So we can see, in any event, the proportion of ARMA being used increasing. And then if we move to 1981, HCDO 301541. We're told 12 Haemophilia A patients, no von Willebrands. Again, we've got the information in terms of packs and bottles. So a greatly reduced volume of cryoprecipitate, 4 packs, an increased volume of NHS concentrate, 386 bottles, and a smaller volume of the ARMA factor 8, 29 bottles. And then handwritten across appears to be NB all HT, which presumably is home treatment, supplied by Royal Liverpool Hospital, nil from aldehyde. So the annual returns may not be giving a clear or comprehensive reflection of what products were actually used to treat the aldehyde patients. If we go to 1982, HCDO 301639. We see 19 patients with Haemophilia A treated, no von Willebrands. And then we've got the figures in packs and bottles, but with what appears to be units written in. So 16 packs of cryo, 1,120 units, 155 bottles of NHS concentrate, 38,750 units. And then this year, by far and away, the largest in terms of treatment is the Armour Factor 8, 647 bottles, 161,750 units. So a marked change in the pattern of treatment in 1982. And we see over the page one haemophilia B patient treated that year with NHS factor concentrate. 1983's return is at HCDO 301739. Again, it's a similar pattern. It's not, again, entirely easy to read. 11 packs of cryo, so cryo in very modest use indeed. NHS concentrate, 218 bottles, which looks like it's identified as being 54,500 units. And then the largest volume of treatment being with Armour Factor 8, 749 bottles, given as 187,250 units. It's not easy to see what's then written across, except it looks like something to similar effect as previously about the supplies for home treatment coming from the Royal Liverpool. And then 1984 is HCDO 301831. Fourteen haemophilia A patients treated, no cryoprecipitate usage recorded at all. NHS concentrate, 339 bottles used in hospital. You'll see home treatment again is said to be supplied from the Royal Liverpool Hospital, and then hospital treatment with Armour Factor 8, 352 bottles. So the proportions are more evenly balanced in terms of home treatment there as between NHS and commercial concentrate. And then we don't have a return for 1985. If we just look then briefly at 1986, HCDO 302021. We can see 19 haemophilia A patients, 2 von Willebrand's patients treated. Again, we've seen no cryo. The figures in hospital show use of NHS concentrate and Armour, presumably in 1986 heat-treated product. We can see there's a reference, other human factor 8 concentrate, 9,000 units, and someone's written question mark which, and type not specified. And then a small amount of NHS concentrate for home treatment. And we see DDAVP being used for von Willebrand's patients. There are also some stock cards which may reflect usage at Alderhay. So we looked at a sample yesterday of those in relation to the Liverpool Centre. If we go, for example, to LUHT 5024, we can see that this is the Royal Liverpool Hospital stock cards, but there's reference, if we go down the page, to Alderhay. So we can see there a supply, for example, of the Elstree, the NHS product, to Alderhay, as well as to Dr. Corn at Bangor. And again, there are a handful of other stock cards. So if we go, just by way of example, LUHT 5031, we can see there the first entry for Armour. It records products being sent to Alderhay, as well again as to Dr. Corn at Bangor, and the like. So that's the information.
When it provides for both home therapy and Alder-Hey, it doesn't say how many of the home therapy treatments might have been Alder-Hey patients.
It doesn't know.
So we just no way of knowing.
We haven't, I'm afraid. There are then two documents I want to refer to, which are expert reports in relation to an individual patient, but which throw some light potentially upon the approach to treatment at Alder-Hey. The first is at DHSC 0043164_068. This is a medical report. It's dated March 1992, and it's from Dr. Savage, St Thomas's Hospital. And it is looking at an individual patient treated at Alder-Hey. If we go a little further down the page, we'll see it was a patient with severe Haemophilia A, diagnosed as such as a baby. Just so that you note it's someone born in 1980. The significance of that appears from the second paragraph on screen. The young boy was first treated on the 1st of March 1982, so aged 2, with US commercial factor 8 concentrates. There is no documentation at that time to indicate that the treatment alternatives with Singer donor pool cryoprecipitate or NHS factor 8 concentrates were ever entertained. During 1982, he was treated on 32 occasions with US concentrate on ARMA and on 5 occasions with NHS material, factor 8 concentrate. This year proved to be the 12 months prior to 1985 that required the most frequent hospital visits, necessitating infusions with factor 8 concentrates. During 1982, some 19,000 units of factor 8 were used. 1983, 7 treatments were administered with US commercial concentrates and 2 with NHS concentrates, totaling in all approximately 5,500 units. In 1984, 4 treatments were given with US commercial concentrates and 4 with NHS concentrates, giving a total of approximately 4,000 units for the year. The last treatment given during 1984 was on the 2nd of December with ARMA factor 8 concentrate, and the batch number is given. This occasion was the only time this batch of unheated material was used. And then in 1985, he was treated on 9 occasions with heat-treated US concentrates. On 2 occasions, this is 1985 and he's 5, on 2 occasions with the US unheated concentrates, on 2 occasions with NHS unheated concentrate, and on 6 occasions with the earliest NHS heated factor 8 material. And then details are given about the use of the unheated ARMA product, reference to the batch. This unheated material was batch number Y88908, which had not been administered to the patient before and was not used subsequently. To my knowledge, at other centres, much of this unheated batch had been returned to the manufacturer, who subsequently heated the product in one of their facilities in West Germany. And then top of the next page, bottom of that page, so where we are. Although the child was seen on several occasions in 1985, the first documentation of blood sampling for antibody to HTLV3 was the 5th of August 1985, and the result indicating HTLV3 seropositivity was reported on the 8th of August 1985. No previous negative results were obtained in this case, rendering a possible date for the initial viral transmission difficult or impossible. And then if we go to Dr. Savage's, or Professor Savage's opinion, bottom half of the page, he says this. This case concerns a young child with severe haemophilia who was treated from 1982 to 1985 with unheated US commercial and NHS factor 8 concentrates for hemorrhagic symptoms. On the 8th of August 85, the patient was shown to have been infected with HTLV3 without a previous negative test result, presumably by transmission of the virus through contaminated blood products. The major issue in this case relating to possible negligence and causation rests upon the choice of therapeutic products used to treat hemorrhagic symptoms. The therapeutic policy adopted to manage this child is evaluated in terms of orthodox practice and knowledge of HTLV3 transmission from blood products at the time, and to the specific recommendations available in the medical literature and proposed by UK HCDO. So you'll see that Dr. Savage's approach is not to look at things with the benefit of hindsight, but to try and compare what was done at Alderhay with what would have been his view of the orthodox approach at the time. Over the page, he says this, under the heading Use of Concentrates as opposed to Cryoprecipitate. There are two notable features of this case with respect to the adopted therapeutic approach. Firstly, there is no documentary evidence to suggest that single donor pool cryoprecipitate was ever contemplated in the management of this case, not even when the patient was initially treated. Secondly, there is evidence to indicate a defined preference to use US commercial products, 45 treatments, over NHS factor VIII concentrate, 9 treatments, during the period 1982-1985, when initially only unheated but subsequently heated products were available. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the majority of UK paediatricians treating infants and children with severe haemophilia considered cryoprecipitate obtained from single blood donations to be the therapeutic product of choice. But if not available, NHS factor VIII concentrate should be used. And then he refers to an 85 publication by Dr. Jones and sets out the recommendation about treating children under the age of 4 with cryo, etc. And then if we go to the bottom of the page, Professor Savage then continues, at that time, this practice was deemed to confer a greater margin of safety from transfusion-related viral diseases such as hepatitis B and non-A non-B hepatitis on the grounds that treatment with a small, less than 50 individual single donations of cryoprecipitate preparations resulted in a reduced incidence of clinical and laboratory indices of hepatitis. In contrast, the donor pools of factor VIII concentrates were derived from several hundreds or thousands of plasma donations. And then he gives an indication about pool sizes by reference to a UK HCDO minute in 1980. The increased morbidity in small children following infection with hepatitis B and non-A non-B hepatitis was an additional reason for choosing cryoprecipitate over concentrate. Furthermore, sufficient amounts of factor VIII necessary to control hemorrhagic symptoms in such small children were available in only a few single donor bags of cryoprecipitate, providing a safe and highly cost-effective approach to such cases. The somewhat larger infusion volumes with such treatments compared to the smaller reconstitution volumes of concentrates were not considered to disadvantage the increased safety aspects of this therapeutic approach. As small amounts of cryoprecipitate were usually required to manage such children, availability of the material from the local BTS was in general no particular problem, and orders could be placed in advance to ensure adequate supplies for individual patients. The side effects occasionally encountered with cryoprecipitate, rashes, asthma-like symptoms, were usually easily controllable with antihistamines and did not impose a relative or absolute contraindication for its use. As the child required treatment in hospital for each bleed, often leading to subsequent inpatient management, any perceived additional convenience for using factor VIII concentrates cannot be considered a pertinent argument for their exclusive use over cryoprecipitate when the issues of safety and cost-effectiveness are also addressed. The lack of consideration and disregard of the then current therapeutic recommendations for the treatment of children under the age of 4 years regarding the use of cryoprecipitate in this case was negligent. Any argument that cryoprecipitate was in poor supply at the time is untenable, since the material was being used in significant amounts for home therapy. The overwhelming use of commercial US concentrates in preference to cryoprecipitate or NHS factor VIII is remarkable, particularly in a large city such as Liverpool, known to have an active blood transfusion service with facilities for cryoprecipitate production and regularly supplying plasma to Elstree for fractionation. The lack of a well-defined therapeutic policy regarding preferential use of domestic plasma derivatives in children at this time was negligent, particularly since the factor VIII requirement in this case during 1983 and 1984 was so minimal that special reserves of cryoprecipitate or NHS factor VIII could have been set aside. A reflection of the orthodox management of children at that time is apparent from the minutes of the UK Haemophilia Reference Centre Directors Meeting of May 1983. That's that 13th of May meeting, which we're familiar with, when particular emphasis was placed upon the use of domestic plasma derivatives. And then there's a quote from that, and then Professor Savage continues, although a slightly modified version of these minutes were circulated as recommendations to all UK Haemophilia Centre directors dated the 24th of June 83, they were clearly not followed in this case. Top of the next page. During 1983 and 1984, both the mass media and the medical press were inundated with reports of AIDS cases in haemophilia and the potential dangers of large donor pool concentrates. And by June 1984, it was clear the factor VIII concentrates in their then present form transmitted HTLV3. And then reference is made by Professor Savage to the reports in relation to the heat sensitivity of HTLV3. He records that US heat-treated factor VIII products had just become available on a named patient basis in the UK. Refers then to recommendations published in 1984, in the October 1984 in the US. And then says these were closely followed in December 1984 by the UK HCDO AIDS advisory document to all UK Haemophilia Centre directors. And then there's a reference to the first meeting of the AIDS group of Haemophilia Centre directors on the 11th of January 1985. And then Professor Savage says this: despite this information, with which a competent practicing paediatric haematologist could be expected to be conversant, and a further report by Bloom in January 1985, which stated that at least 2 batches of NHS concentrated transmitted HIV and urged the use of heat-treated concentrates, the patient was given 2 infusions of unheated US concentrate in January 1985 and 2 infusions of unheated NHS concentrates in March 1985. And just to remind, the age of the patient at that point in time was around 5 years old. The infusion of these untreated therapeutic agents at these times, when heat-treated concentrates were commercially available, was negligent. And from the available data, these treatments could have been the likely causation whereby HTLV3 was transmitted to the patient, which subsequently led to the development of AIDS in this child. Professor Savage, I think it's fair to say, pulling no punches in his analysis of the approach to treatment taken in relation to this child at Alderhay Hospital. There is a draft report on the same patient, and again, we're not identifying the patient, from Dr. Ludlam, April 1992. It's at DHSC 0043164_067. And we'll see the date 6th of April 1992 at the bottom of the page. You'll also see reference, so if we just go back up again, the patient is identified as JKP37, and we'll look at some of the internal documents relating to the HIV litigation in that regard. Dr. Ludlam's report details the patient's treatment and symptoms over a period of years. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but I'd just ask you to look at page 7, when you will see from just over halfway down the page, this child patient at Alderhay died in 1989. He died at the age of around 9 years old, having been infected with HIV. If we go over to page 9, it's right to say that Dr. Ludlam is perhaps more circumspect in his observations, but nonetheless raises a number of questions. And we get some insight from this report into what it was apparently that Dr. Martin or Dr. McVery had been saying about the availability of products. So under the heading opinion, the patient was first found to be anti-HTLV3 positive on a blood sample collected 8th of August 1985. Prior to this, he'd received infusions of factor VIII concentrate, predominantly of commercial origin. It's likely, therefore, that he obtained the HIV infection from the factor VIII concentrate infusions. His haemophilic bleeds clearly required treatment, but it would be useful to know of the policy for treating children with severe haemophilia. In Dr. Martin's evidence, and we don't know what that refers to, sir, maybe something we will try and track down, but it would appear that for the purposes of defending the litigation, information had been sought by Dr. Martin, from Dr. Martin. In Dr. Martin's evidence, it stated that he was aware of the risks of hepatitis transmission by concentrates, that cryoprecipitate was effectively phased out in 1980, and that treatment was advised by the Royal Liverpool Hospital. It is therefore necessary to know what policy was operated by the Royal Liverpool Hospital. Dr. McVery's evidence, and again we don't know what material was gathered from Dr. McVery in this regard, does not accord with this. Why was it decided to phase out cryoprecipitate in 1980? Was there a policy about which patient should receive NHS and which commercial concentrate? Why was concentrate purchased from Armour rather than another supplier? The patient could have been treated effectively with cryoprecipitate in the first few years of life whilst receiving treatment as an outpatient. If cryoprecipitate was not available, then NHS concentrate would be the most appropriate therapy. In the absence of both these products, then commercial should have been used. And then we're told in the next paragraph, Dr. Martin has no recollection of receiving the letter of the 24th of June 1983 from Professor Bloom and Dr. Ritzer. This same letter was presumably received by the Royal Liverpool Hospital Haemophilia Centre, and it would be useful to learn of any changes in treatment policy which resulted. And then Dr. Ludlam suggests that Dr. Martin should comment on the letter sent in December 1984 from Professor Bloom and Dr. Ritzer recommending a change to heat-treated products. When did Alderhay Hospital change over to the use of heat-treated concentrate? And then Dr. Ludlam says it's impossible from the clinical history to identify when the patient seroconverted to HIV. He had recurrent sore throats from early life, which were most likely to have been caused by ordinary respiratory viruses and not HIV. He refers to seroconversion rising rapidly in 1981 to 1983, but says many haemophiliacs, however, became infected after 1983 from concentrate which was likely to contain an increasing amount of HIV. No mention is made in the case notes or in Dr. Martin's submission about what was said either specifically or in general about the possibility of virus transmission by blood products. It would be useful to know what information was made available to patients or parents. I should say we've seen no evidence of any information about the risks of AIDS being made available to patients or parents. So again, expressed in different terms, but raising the same questions, essentially, as Professor Savage is perhaps more forthrightly expressed conclusions, but an indication that may give rise to a number of concerns about the approach to treatment of children in Alderhay Children's Hospital in the 80s.
Well, contrary to the general practice, if Professor Savage is right, and by implication Professor Ludlam, cryoprecipitate was reduced.
Yes.
In the general supply. Children were exposed, according to both doctors, to obviously an increased risk of contracting hepatitis and HIV infections. There was no recorded reason for differing from the usual practice which he gives. Both doctors, I think, identify exactly the same point. There was no available treatment protocol. And the letters which were later on from the UK HCDO do not appear to have alerted Dr. Martin to anything.
No. We cannot, of course, ask Dr. Martin because he is dead.
Yes.
So we can't, I'm afraid, do anything other than explore through documents these alarming matters.
It may be, well, I shall simply have to draw whatever inferences are proper from this material.
There's then some further information we can glean about the approach at Alderhay from DHSC 0045373_118. So this is the internal status report on medical negligence cases. And there are, I think, 4 Alderhay cases. We looked at some of the Liverpool adult hospital cases yesterday. So if we go to page 10, the case of JKP 027, there's a reference to Dr. Martin, which is how we understand this to be an Alderhay case. So severe haemophilia, born 1984, younger brother of another plaintiff, diagnosed at the age of 2 months and treated from that time onwards exclusively with factor VIII concentrate. So concentrates being given to a 2-month-old baby in 1984. There is no record of the type of concentrate given in August 1984, but he received commercial armour concentrate from February 1985 to September 1986, apart from a single dose of heat-treated NHS concentrate 8Y in January 86. He was switched to 8Y concentrate in November 86 and continued to receive this through 1987. Heat-treated commercial concentrate became available at the beginning of 1985, but I cannot tell from the batch numbers whether the material administered to the plaintiff in 1985 was exclusively heat-treated. In any event, the type of heat treatment used by Armour subsequently proved to be incompletely effective in destroying HIV. And then the statement of claim gives the date of the first HIV positive test as the 21st of February 1987. The notes contain no record of HIV test results before 1988. The note for the 30th of August 85 states blood for HTLV taken again, and a letter from Dr. John Martin in the notes of the plaintiff's brother, dated 31st of December 85, states that both brothers were then HTLV3 positive, although the first mention of HIV positivity in the plaintiff's own notes is in a letter dated the 21st of July 1987. It therefore appears that seroconversion took place in 1985 or earlier. The risk of AIDS to haemophiliacs and the possibility of removing these risks by heat treatment of concentrate were already beginning to be appreciated at the end of 1984. That's obviously the perspective of this particular author, and rather than necessarily a more widely accepted view, when the plaintiff was first treated. But then the author says this: I think it must be accepted that it was negligent to treat him with concentrate at this time rather than with cryoprecipitate. There appears to have been no good clinical reason, e.g. major hemorrhage, home treatment, for preferring concentrate to cryoprecipitate. And it would certainly be indefensible if any of the commercial concentrate given in 1985 was unheat treated. If cryoprecipitate was unavailable at this time, then either heat-treated commercial concentrate or unheated NHS concentrate should have been used until such time as NHS heat-treated concentrate became available. Conclusion: negligence. If we go over the page, we can see the case of what's said to be the brother, diagnosed November 1982, aged 6 months, treated exclusively with factor VIII concentrate from that time onwards. So again, another case of a baby being treated with concentrates. 2 doses in 82, 16 in 1983, 19 in 1984, and about 30 in 1985. Commercial material was given in March 1983, but apart from this, there's no record of source or batch numbers until December 1984, when he received a dose of NHS concentrate. From the 2nd to the 19th of January 85, he was treated with a total of 26 ampoules of commercial concentrate batch Y88908. This was probably unheat treated, so a baby being given or a toddler being given unheat treated commercial concentrates in January 85. Since heat-treated commercial concentrate only became available sometime during that month. A single dose of NHS concentrate was given on the 29th of the 3rd, 85, and subsequently more commercial concentrate, presumably heat-treated during 85 and 86. And then again, we can see it's a Alderhay case from the reference to Dr. Martin in the next paragraph. First mention in the notes that the plaintiff was HIV positive occurs in a letter from Dr. Martin dated the 31st of December 85, but a note dated 8th of August 85 states blood taken for HTLV3 screening. There are no actual laboratory results of HIV testing earlier than 1988. And then, again, the view given here may not accord with the views of others, but in any event, this is what the person analysing this for the purposes of defending the litigation says. I do not believe that it can be held to have been negligent to treat a baby boy with commercial factor concentrate at the end of 82, when the risks of AIDS were not well appreciated. During the following year, however, and particularly after June 1983, when the Haemophilia Reference Centre directors issued their first recommendations on treatment, the risk should have been recognised. A switch to cryoprecipitate at that time might still have protected the plaintiff against HIV infection. In the light of the further recommendations of December 1984, it must be held to have been negligent to treat the plaintiff with unheat-treated commercial concentrate in January 1985, if this was indeed the case. I do not think this case is defensible. Conclusion, negligence.
Is this the same case as Professors Savage and Ludlam were reporting?
No, because the year of birth doesn't match up.
Right. Yes, I mean, the author of this takes a generous view of when risk was first appreciated. Generous, that is, to the hospital.
Yes.
But even on that basis, comes to the conclusion that there is set out at the end.
Yes. And then...
so these are two brothers?
Yes. And then if we turn to page 19, there's less information available about this case, referred to as JKP 60. This child, haemophiliac severe, born in 1976, died in 1986. It's alleged that from 1979 onwards, treated with concentrate, his mother says that he was on cryo up to the age of 3 with no adverse reaction. Professor Hardesty comments that the plaintiff was treated at Alderhay Hospital, Liverpool, until May 1984, and then we can see transferred, it would appear, to treatment home treatment from North Wales. Treatment was evidently with concentrate from an early age, but the Liverpool notes are currently not available. Treatment in Wales was almost exclusively with NHS concentrate, with the occasional doses of commercial concentrate, presumably because of insufficient NHS material being available. HIV positive in July 1985 with no previous negative results, although a sample was taken on the 30th of January 1985, but evidently not reported on. Currently, Professor Hardesty can only make the general point here that treatment of a severely affected infant or young child with concentrate is not of itself negligent. Cryoprecipitate is unsuitable for home treatment in many instances and has many disadvantages. NHS concentrate should have been preferred to commercial from about mid-83, but supplies were inadequate to adhere entirely to this counsel of perfection. Only heat-treated concentrate should have been used from early 1985, as was indeed the case here. Needs reconsideration once Liverpool notes were available. In the meantime, no evidence of negligence. Again, the purpose for referring to this is really, as with all this, about what it indicates more widely about the approach taken to treatment at Alderhay. It would appear here the case of a child switched at the age of 3 from cryoprecipitate, to which the child had had no adverse reactions, to concentrate, and treated at Alderhay with concentrates from 1979 to May 1984. And you will see here again reference to the not having the Liverpool notes, at least at that point in time.
Well, the note retention and taking system seems to be a mess.
Yes.
It confirms what we've heard from Professor Hay, I think.
Yeah, well, Professor Hay's dealing with the adult centre.
Yes,
but Dr. Ball says
yes,
the same thing
Dr.
about
Ball,
the Alderhay notes, and I'll come back to her statement shortly. And then the last Alderhay case in this document is at page 24. So JKP 105, severe haemophiliac child born in 1976, given no treatment other than concentrate, save for one isolated treatment in 1982 with cryoprecipitate. Professor Hardesty, who presumably has been asked to give an opinion on these cases, states that in accordance with the policy at Liverpool Children's Hospital, so Alderhay, he was treated with concentrate from 1978 onwards, so from the age of 2, that would roughly place it. There are no records of the type or batch number until January 1983, when he received commercial concentrate, March 1983 NHS, December 1983 commercial. In June and August 1984, he received NHS concentrate, and thereafter heat-treated concentrate, first commercial and then NHS. There's a record that blood was taken for HIV testing in August 85, but the earliest positive laboratory result is dated December 1987. So again, a very muddled picture in relation to the process for HIV testing of these children. And there is no mention in the notes of his being HIV positive before this date. The plaintiff was treated with factor VIII concentrate from, I think it's 1979 onwards, i.e. about 4 years before AIDS was described. This was probably mainly commercial material, since NHS concentrate was in very short supply in the early 1980s. An attempt was made in 1983 to switch to NHS concentrate, although the extent to which this was achieved cannot be judged in the absence of complete records. And then the assertion is made by the author, again, of this document, presumably from a perspective of defending litigation. HIV infection was probably derived from concentrate before the risks were appreciated. A switch to cryoprecipitate in 1983 would have deprived the plaintiff of the great advantage of home treatment and would probably have been too late in any event. Quite what the basis for saying that is, given the paucity of information, is wholly unclear.
Well, it relies on the absence of records, essentially.
Yes. And then there's a further status report. So that status report on cases is July 1991. There's one from September 1991, which provides some further insight into the approach at Alderhay. It's DHSC 004571_051. If we go to the second page, you'll see there's a update on the cases of JKP 27 and 28, the brothers whose cases were looked at in the previous note. And then if we look at the bottom of the page, we see a third case. This is JKP 33, an Alderhay case, haemophilia classified as mild/moderate. The notes are insufficiently detailed to identify whether all treatment given was NHS product, but Dr. Martin's statement confirms that no distinction was made at Alderhay Hospital in terms of which product to prefer, and the product he would have received would have been that which was available. So that would appear to give the clearest possible indication from Dr. Martin that whether it was NHS or commercial concentrate for the treatment of these young children didn't seem to make any difference. We then see a reference to the plaintiff having elective surgery for bat ears in 1983. And if we go to the top of the next page, although Dr. Martin says he did his best to discourage the operation, he did not do so in the specific context of the risk of viral infection or the risk of infection of AIDS, and the parents were not warned in relation to these aspects. And then it's suggested there needs to be a further review, and it's likely the case will need to be reclassified. Towards the bottom of the page, you'll see JKP 37. That is, I think, the case that Professor Savage and Dr. Ludlam were discussing in their reports. And then if we go over the page to page 4, please, Shomik. The case of JKP 47, mild haemophiliac child, Alderhay Hospital case. Second paragraph, after further investigations into the case with Dr. Martin, it would appear that the plaintiff did receive commercial factor VIII in December 1983 for a tooth extraction. This treatment would not seem to be justified. This appears to be a case for settlement. So commercial concentrates, December 1983, child with mild haemophilia. Again, there doesn't appear to have been any particular distinction drawn at Alderhay between the treatment of those with mild haemophilia and the treatment of those with severe haemophilia.
Could we just go back to the very last line of the previous page?
Certainly.
This is an adult, I see.
It is, although I should say it's a Liverpool case. It's an adult Liverpool case. It might have been one of the ones we looked at yesterday. I'm afraid I can't remember the JKP number we looked at yesterday. That was a case of a mild haemophilia adult treated at Liverpool. And if we go to the top of the next page, the first long paragraph, 4 lines from the end, Dr. McVery comments that no specific priority was given to mild haemophiliacs for treatment with NHS product at the time.
Yes.
So it would appear, both in terms of adults and children in the Liverpool area, a similar approach being adopted. And then the last Alderhay case in this document is top of page 5. JKP 92, severe haemophiliac child, Alderhay. He was regularly treated with concentrate, at least some of it commercial, after mid-1983. This case is therefore difficult to defend. So that's the insights we get into the approach to treatment at Alderhay. We can take that down, thank you, Shimmick. Dr. Bolton Maggs was senior registrar slightly later in this, 87 to 88. But her recollection is that DDAVP was not used until a later stage, the late 80s. Then in relation to Dr. Ball's evidence, we've already looked at her observation that when she came on the scene at Alderhay in 1989 and looked at records, she could find no batch reservation system. And she then also says in her statement, a large proportion of the clinical notes of children affected by HIV were on close inspection missing essential treatment and decision-making details. She observes, and it's consistent with what we've looked at here, that factor concentrates were used in mild cases before her tenure. And then we have a witness statement. I'm not going to put it up on screen, but I just wanted to read a couple of passages from it aloud. So it's a statement from a mother whose 3 children were treated at Alderhay. 2 of them infected with HIV and both died. 3rd child infected with hepatitis C. She describes incomplete records. She was not given information about risk, so she says this: we were not told anything about factor 8. We received no advice whatsoever. I didn't know where it was coming from. I thought it was something that was going to help them, and it appeared to be better treatment than what my brother had received. He also suffered from haemophilia. And again, hers is given what happened to her family, an extraordinarily powerful statement to read, sir. And I'll return to a little of what she says about the process of learning about the HDLV3 diagnosis shortly. In terms of what was known about the risks of hepatitis and HIV, or should have been known at Alderhay, it is notable that Dr. Martin is not recorded as having attended UK HCDO meetings in the 70s or 80s, perhaps reflective of the fact that he was a paediatric oncologist rather than a haematologist or a specialist with bleeding disorders, although there's no reason to think he wouldn't have been sent the minutes of those meetings. There are a handful of documents about hepatitis. I'm not going to go to the individual documents, but there are the hepatitis survey forms from time to time completed by Alderhay. There's a form completed by a registrar to Dr. Martin in March 1979, recording a patient treated with factor VIII and co-8 and developing hepatitis, for example. But we don't have a clear idea of what Dr. Martin's own personal understanding of hepatitis risks was, although you'll no doubt be able to draw appropriate conclusions as to what should have been known at the time. Likewise, because he didn't attend UKHCDO meetings, he doesn't appear to have been present at the meetings at which AIDS was discussed, and as we've seen from the document we just looked at, his account apparently given within the context of the HIV litigation was an account of not recalling receiving the June 1983 letter from Professor Bloom and Dr. Ritzer. It doesn't appear to have been asked, or there's no reference to the receipt or otherwise of the March 1983 letter, which contained Dr. Krask's report and the forms for reporting AIDS symptoms in patients. In terms of the arrangements then for testing patients for HTLV3 and informing them of their diagnosis, as with the Liverpool Centre at the Royal Liverpool Hospital, this is a significant issue at Alderhay as well. If we go to Dr. Ball's evidence, she says, I don't think I need to put it up on screen, it's just a few lines. She says, I'm not directly aware of the circumstance whereby the process of testing was undertaken, but parents informed me that they were not counselled before testing and received a positive, in quotation marks, outcome by means of a letter addressed to the parents. And she recalls also in her statement one mother thinking that a positive test was a good outcome, unsurprisingly. And one mother hearing that letters had been sent was so distressed that she was unable to open the letter for months. Dr. Ball, again, also describes in her statement that in relation to the question of telling the children themselves of their HIV infection, that was something that she would, once she came on board in 1989, discuss with parents as to how and when the children themselves would be informed. She refers to how difficult that was for parents and the atmosphere of stigmatisation at the time. There is other evidence which is consistent with Dr. Ball's understanding that HTLV3 test results were communicated by letter. And that appears, when we looked at Professor Hayes' HIV litigation statement, to have been his understanding of the position at Alderhay as well. We've got an example of one such letter at DHSC 00395356. DHSC 0039536, sorry. Yes, so it's the 28th of August 1985. We've now received the results of the special antibody test that we performed on your son as part of the screening programme for all children with haemophilia and related disorders. I have to tell you that he does show the presence of HDLV3 antibodies, i.e. he has evidence of antibodies against the virus that it's thought to cause AIDS. This does not mean that your son has AIDS, but just that he has been exposed to the virus. Most people who are positive for HDLV3 antibody do indeed remain well and never develop features of AIDS. A small minority run a risk of developing this condition in the future. If we just
this is not at all. Remember, I draw your attention to part of what was in the report, wasn't it? In the journal in which Dr. McVery was writing. So, at the same time as the Liverpool Hospital was saying, we just don't know. He is saying, or the author of this is saying...
If we go to the bottom of the page, we'll see it's Dr. Martin.
Dr. Martin, who had no particular knowledge of haemophilia care or the risks, is saying something you could not possibly say.
Yes.
On the state of knowledge at the time.
Yes.
Yes.
There are statements from other witnesses who received the letter in similar or identical form. Again, I won't put it up on screen, but we've copies of of effectively an identical letter. I'm sorry, if we just put that one back. You'll see from the last paragraph, we've arranged a short seminar on haemophilia and AIDS to endeavour to answer any questions you may have, and there's going to be a microbiologist, Dr. Hart, present. That's scheduled for the 4th of September of 1985. So again, there's a question as to why testing and provision of information about test results is taking place only in the late summer or early autumn of 1985. And there is an account from a witness of her attendance at that meeting, which I will just read out. Check I've got the right one. Yes. So this is an account from a mother whose son was infected with HIV and hepatitis C. Says the seminar took place in the C3 ward at Alderhay on the 4th of September 1985. I attended the seminar with my husband, and the room was full with between 60 and 100 people. The seminar was for families of those who'd been tested for HIV, and we knew many of the families from meeting them at Alderhay. Dr. Martin led the seminar and then handed over to Dr. Hart, who was a consultant microbiologist. People were shouting and asking questions, and the meeting ended up being very emotional and hostile. No explanation was provided during the meeting about why this had happened, and no one apologised or took blame. I felt as though it was pushed under the carpet that people had been infected with HIV. People left feeling upset and angry about what was raised during the meeting. Dr. Martin was very abrupt, and I clearly remember him saying, if you think you can take this to court, you haven't got a case. And then, just up, again, I'm not going to put, I think, on screen, but I'll just read very briefly from the statement of the mother of 3 boys, 2 of whom were infected with HIV and died. She confirms that they, in terms of the testing and the communication of the diagnosis, she says, we were told that the boys needed to go for blood tests. I never even thought to ask what the tests were for, as it was just the norm as they were haemophiliacs. They were always having blood taken. We later received a letter which said that they'd been infected with HIV. My dad saw my extreme reaction to the letter and came over to ask what was wrong. And she observes, you may think unsurprisingly, I find it disgusting that I was informed of my son's HIV status by a letter. She then talks about being asked to go to Alderhay the following week, maybe a reference to the same meeting. Dr. Martin was standing there and he said, I don't want you all coming up here with coughs and colds. He basically told us that if they had symptoms, he didn't want us to bring them to hospital, as not all symptoms was a result of HIV. And she says, I was not provided with any information about the virus itself. I was given no information as to the possible routes of transmission or risk of infection to others. In terms of the numbers infected, and so you'd have seen from the annual returns the kind of numbers treated at Alderhay Hospital over the years. So ranges from 10 patients in 1978 with haemophilia A to 19 patients in 1982, 16 patients with haemophilia A in 1983, 14 in 1984. The provisional data supplied by the UK HCDO from the National Haemophilia Database to the inquiry suggests that 13 patients at Alderhay were infected with HIV, having tested positive in the course of 1985. That's pretty consistent with Dr. Ball's recollection that there were approximately 12 boys with haemophilia who were HIV positive. Her recollection is that as a proportion of children registered per centre in the UK, this was one of the highest, if not the highest proportion of HIV positive haemophiliacs.
Well, it's over 90%.
Yes. The statement I referred to a few minutes ago, the mother of 2 boys who died, also commented in her statement. She said, at Alderhay it was like a conveyor belt of children dying. We would constantly get phone calls from other parents and families telling us that another child had died. In relation to hepatitis C testing, sir, at Alderhay, Dr. Ball's recollection or understanding was that that began during Dr. Bolton Magg's tenure. So after Dr. Ball had left, she couldn't recall having direct involvement other than monitoring liver function. It may be because, she tells us in her statement, she was absent but on maternity leave and then a period of illness from late 1991 for a period of time. And during that period of time, she says Dr. Bolton Maggs acted as locum. So the position, therefore, is not entirely clear as to when hepatitis C testing was undertaken at Alderhay. Dr. Bolton Maggs' recollection is that once the testing became available, and she thinks it was in 1992, patients would be screened and results would be passed to patients or parents as soon as possible. Again, there is evidence of delays, as we've heard, in relation to many of the centres. And then the last topic, I think, in relation to Alderhay is how children infected with HIV were treated for their HIV at Alderhay. And again, I think I can probably best take this from the statement of Dr. Ball. If we put it back up on the screen, please, Seamus, it's WITN 4739001. If we start with the bottom of page 13, very bottom of the page, she says, unlike the boys in Great Ormond Street, a number of children at the beginning of 1989 were already beginning to show evident signs of severe immune dysfunction as a result of the virus manifesting in the development of opportunistic infections. And then if we go to page 16, she describes in the bottom of the page that it became evident that a significant proportion of the HIV-affected boys were severely immune compromised, which at the time was not the experience of many paediatric haematology colleagues I consulted. And then there's reference to starting the children on treatment. And then top of the next page, around this time, the situation with the hospital management deteriorated. This resulted from one of the boys being acutely admitted to C3, that's one of the individual wards, with severe pneumonia as a result of full-blown AIDS. He was 8 years old. After his mother made it known to another parent that her son was HIV positive, there was a distressing moment for all the parents, who were very frightened and concerned about the infectivity risk and welfare of their children with cancer. Together with the ward senior sister, Doris Hackle, who had nursed these children from diagnosis to adulthood, we met the parents individually and felt that we had reassured them not only to safety issues but also to the necessity of the child with a highly immune-compromised state being cared for in a ward with expertise and surrounded by staff that he knew and trusted. And then Dr. Ball recounts this. I found that without consultation, the child under my care, so the 8-year-old child with severe pneumonia and AIDS, was moved to a general paediatric medical ward the following morning under the instructions of the acting senior ward consultant and medical director. No appeal by myself or the nursing staff could assuage him to change his decision. In fact, I was accused of deliberately influencing the nursing staff to be openly hostile to his decision. I've never understood why his animosity towards me manifested itself in such a way, but the nursing staff independently opposed the decision, as one might expect from professionals who had for years provided care for this subgroup of children. I appealed directly to the hospital manager, who refused to be involved in what he determined was a purely clinical matter. The edict didn't stop there, as from that moment all children with haemophilia were no longer to be treated or admitted to Ward C3, but would instead be seen on a general paediatric ward with nurses who had no experience in the management of immune-compromised children or bleeding disorders. The dismay and distress this caused the parents of these boys was in my mind then, as it is now, as being cruel and unnecessary. The parents asked me to mediate, but I was unable to convince my colleague to reverse this decision, but the hospital manager agreed to meet with the parents. She thinks that was around February 1990, and he subsequently agreed to the provision of a dedicated unit, and that was how the Paediatric Haemophilia Centre, she says, was finally established at Alderhay. And if we go to page 21, sorry, actually, I don't think I need to go to that. Yes, so if we just go to page 29.
As a matter of interest, who was the medical director?
It was Dr. John Martin. He had by that time become medical director of the hospital.
Yes.
And there's a letter with from a solicitor representing the parents of patients, which has some observations to make, which I'll come to in a moment. Before I do that, we're just looking at Dr. Ball's statement. She just says this is some general reflections. My positions both at Great Ormond Street and Alderhay were ones of caring for the consequences of previous treatments and trying to improve services directed at the care of children and families with haemophilia and life-threatening infection. This also required not only direct medical care but psychosocial support in a time when nationwide fear and stigmatisation were rampant and supportive care requirements were sadly lacking. And then she talks about HIV being new and relatively unknown. She talks about the work that was undertaken at Great Ormond Street. And then she says this about Alderhay. Alderhay failed because there was insufficient staffing and attention to detail by those charged with the care of these patients. My appointment is in part to correct some of these deficiencies, but lack of adequate funding and a hospital management team, including the medical director, were unwilling to assist in prioritising the care of these children, even though the government at the time was promising families and patients with haemophilia that they would, as compensation, receive the highest quality of care the NHS could offer. No amount of reasoning, cajoling or adversarial tactics or any other means I could muster effected a change in this institutional attitude. And then if we look at DHSC 002459_012, DHSC 002459_012. So it's a letter from J.K. Park solicitors from Graham Ross representing a number of parents of haemophiliac children at Alderhay. And he says in the second paragraph, we've been asked by parents of haemophiliac children at Alderhay Hospital to advise regarding the standard of care current at the hospital and to write to the general manager at the hospital, which I've done as attached. Your clients will be aware of an ongoing dispute that has led to a number of meetings between the parents and the general manager. The general nature of the complaints is that the children, when requiring inpatient care, are being placed in a general ward together with children with infectious diseases and no longer, unlike in the past, are being given the support of nursing staff with experience in haemophilia and HIV. Further, they are often passed around from pillar to post at times of bed shortage with no sense of priority. Finally, and unlike in the past, there's no reserved area to which parents can bring their children for day treatment. The above situation is prejudicial to the health of the children in that whilst immunosuppressed, they're being closely exposed to all manner of infections and in an environment where the nursing staff are untrained and inexperienced to sufficiently identify early signs of damage. My clients are having to suffer the added strain of a constant fear that the lives of their children will be shortened even further than they can already expect, specifically because of the failure at the hospital to take sufficient steps for their protection. Further, the children and parents alike desperately need to feel some continuity of staff and location, to know there is a place where they can come to, whether to collect supplies or generally for help and counselling in their more difficult times, where they will feel known and welcomed. The second paragraph on the next page refers to the parents' request for change being fully supported by Dr. Ball, which is consistent with Dr. Ball, what Dr. Ball has said in her statement. And then if we pick it up in the fourth paragraph, I have to say that I'm extremely concerned at the conduct as reported to me, not only of Mr. Butler, but of Dr. Martin, the paediatric consultant, who formerly cared for these children and whose position as head of medical directorships appears to have drawn him into administrative decisions that have led directly to these complaints. This is particularly distressing for the parents when, of course, it was the clinical decisions of Dr. Martin that in many cases, according to the allegations in the pleadings, led to the HIV infection. It seems extraordinary that the hospital, seen by the parents as responsible, at least in general terms, for infecting their children, can be so inept at handling patient relations as to bring about the present situation. It is perhaps significant that at no time has Dr. Martin offered any personal sympathy or sense of regret to any of the parents. I should, I think, make reference to the response, again, of Ms. Saunders, from Alderhay, responding to the issues raised in Dr. Ball's statement. So if we go back to WITN 4194006, and I read from parts of her statement previously. I can pick it up at the third page. So paragraph 11, she's referring to the issues that we've just been discussing by reference to Dr. Ball's statement. And the way in which the children with HIV were going to be cared for at the hospital. She says, the information provided to me, I'm afraid, is that this process appears to have happened without appropriate consultation with the families affected or a plan to educate the staff on the general paediatric ward to which their care was transferred. Members of the haematology team welcomed the separation as they felt that the care of children with malignant conditions took precedence on the oncology unit. I very much regret that I cannot now explain these apparent failings. Over the page, top of the page, Ms. Saunders says that Alderhay had not had the benefit of anyone with Dr. Ball's knowledge and experience prior to her appointment. And this, nor am I able to explain, looking back many years later, why having appointed someone with the degree of knowledge and specialism of this witness, her advice was not initially acted upon. Alderhay prides itself upon being a learning organisation, and we will reflect upon these matters and the lessons they provide even after so many years. And then paragraph 15, funding in the NHS is often an issue. There is never enough money to provide all the care and treatments that are possible and that we would wish for our parents. If funding priorities at that time were wrong or lacked insight, I'm very sorry and apologise on behalf of the Trust to all those who suffered as a result of those decisions. She apologises in the next paragraph to Dr. Ball, and then paragraph 18 says this: most of all, I would like to apologise on behalf of the Trust for the distress these shortcomings must have caused to patients and their families who have suffered such trauma and tragedy and deserved better. I am truly and deeply sorry. So that's the response that we've had from the current, those in charge at the current Alder Hey Trust. I should say we have, and I'm not going to refer to it now, but we have, again, statements from parents about the way in which the children were cared for at Alder Hey at that period in time, and it describes their experiences in a way which is very consistent with what we've seen related by Dr. Ball and what we saw related by Mr. Ross on their behalf in his solicitor's letter. That's those are the key parts of the material relating to Alder Hey that I wanted to refer to. And note the time. I wonder if we could take lunch now and then we can start with the remaining centres after lunch. I'm not going to rush any of them.
No.
It is right to say, however, that most of the rest of the centres that I'm proposing or hoping still to cover today have far fewer documents to look at, simply because there are fewer revelatory or informative documents than there were in relation to these two centres that we've been looking at this morning. So I should still be able to cover a lot this afternoon, but we'll see how we get on. If there isn't enough time to cover all of those, then we will cover them on another occasion rather than compress or rush any of them.
Yes. Can I just recap a little of what we have heard this morning? You've been absolutely right to take Alder Hey, but for that matter, to some extent, Liverpool, Royal Liverpool Hospital, at the length that you have. As Miss Saunders says, it may be an object lesson to be learned from the comparison, in particular, between the accounts you've given through your presentation in respect of Alder Hey and what we heard yesterday from you about the Sheffield Children's Hospital. They may be separated only by a few miles in the Pennines, but they're worlds apart in what you have described. And to identify the essential differences, what are they? Are they that the treatment in Sheffield was led by the most up-to-date scientific knowledge at the time, by somebody expert in the field, that led to a focus upon cryoprecipitate as the treatment of choice, and very great care to avoid, where possible, treatment with concentrates, certainly commercial, in facilities which had the additional support staff that you identified in a dedicated centre, in part, I think, in Sheffield. Am I right about that?
I can't remember the timings in terms of when the facilities were developed, but certainly there was a dedicated paediatric haematologist.
And with access to, again, a team which, in Sheffield generally, which had shown itself well aware of the particular risks of hepatitis non-A, non-B from an early stage. And plainly having the support of the hospital management at the time and the region. Are there any other significant differences that you would identify? Because the result couldn't be more different, could it? It's 90%, over 90% of children, some brothers from the same family, dying of infection with HIV in Liverpool, and probably one only being seroconverting in Sheffield?
Yes. There may be some similarities in the sense of it's in terms of the provision of information to parents about risks. There's no particular evidence in relation to Sheffield of a in common with I think what we've learnt about the majority of places. There doesn't appear to be evidence of a proactive approach to warning parents or patients about risks. But certainly, what we see from Sheffield appears to have been a relationship between the Children's Hospital and the Adult Centre, absolutely as we have in Liverpool, so mirrored in that sense. But in Sheffield, it's underpinned by, perhaps no doubt, the work of Professor Preston, the particular awareness of the risks of hepatitis, which led to a focus upon cryoprecipitate for children, not exclusively, but at least being a main form of treatment, in marked contrast to the position in Liverpool, where cryoprecipitate appears to have played little or no part in treatment, even for those of a very, very young age. And it is almost entirely commercial concentrates, or very substantially commercial concentrates, with no apparent thought being given to the risk, no differentiation between mild, moderate and severe, no alternatives being contemplated, is the picture which emerges from the documents we've seen.
Well, there may be, and if there are, I can hear about them in submissions in due course, other underlying reasons, other than the particular personalities or views of those who were running the centres, which resulted in such differences in outcome and, as far as I can see from the witness statements, the degree of parental satisfaction.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. If you have any more to say about those brief reflections, I couldn't let the Alder Hey presentation go without making some reflections on it, and I shall have to think more carefully about quite where it fits into the overall picture.
Yes, sir.
But 2 o'clock.